Happy Friday. All aboard the Dakorien Moore hype train.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Plenty coming today, spring chatter, tidbits, notes, questions, and what's next for Oregon basketball in the portal. That is all on today's show. So, Dante Moore was speaking to the media after practice yesterday, and he was asked about Dakorien Moore and the other wide receivers, of course. And this is, I don't think it's overstating it to say offensively the most hyped offensive skill position player since DeAnthony Thomas. I mean, I'm going through it, not quarterback, not offensive lineman like Penei Sewell. No. Skill position player on offense. He's right up there as one of the most hyped ever. He's the second highest rated recruit in Oregon history, regardless of position, trailing only Kayvon Thibodeau. And Dante Moore was asked about him, and he said, quote, "He's doing what's advertised. He's true to his talent. He's for sure what people are saying. It's true." Now, have I ever seen any football player get up to the mic and say something bad about a teammate? No. But you read enough of these quotes over time, and you learn to read between the lines a little bit. If Dakorien Moore was doing fine, if he was just, solid, but maybe is going to be on a longer trajectory, I don't know that Dante Moore would specifically say the words, "He's for sure what people are saying, it's true." Maybe he would. But it seems like if he's willing to go, this is not Dante Moore's first go-round, of course. This is his third year of college football. He's done plenty of these press availabilities. He wasn't speaking out of turn or saying something that the coaching staff wouldn't have told him he's okay to go out there and say. I think he was giving an honest answer. Yep, nope, he's living up to it. And what does that mean for the receiver room? That you've got a lot of talent in there, regardless of which position you look at, regardless of how many receivers you want to have on the field at one time. I think Oregon is as capable this year to line up with 4 or 5 receivers on the field as they have been in the last several years. And Dakorien Moore is certainly a part of that. But I think you would have seen something more along the lines of, he's doing a good job. He's working hard. He knows he's got to, adjust to the college game and whatnot. Nope, he just kind of went straight to, hey, this guy's every bit as good as you think he is. Well, maybe that's not a good thing for Dakorien. I don't know, because I think quotes like this ratchet up the pressure on the 5-star true freshman. Because I see stuff like this and go, man, and other people, maybe you, if you saw Dante Moore give this quote recently, maybe you saw it and thought, oh boy, maybe Dante Moore is going to be that sort of guy. And you know what? DeAnthony Thomas was every bit as good as he was hyped up to be. And I remember that recruitment was Oregon USC back in the day. It was a big deal that Oregon was able to pull him out of the Los Angeles area. And he had a horrible first game, by the way, because he got thrown right into the fire against LSU. But that entire season, dude was every bit as good as we hoped he'd be. And his entire career, he was every bit as good as we hoped he would be. So now Dakorien is in that sort of position where the hype train is there. He's getting all sorts of questions from the media, not even necessarily directly to him. I mean, he was on an interview. He was on a podcast doing an interview recently. I don't know that any other Oregon players had been on that show. I think it was called The Pivot with Ryan Clark and a couple of other guys. They had Anthony Mackie, the Falcon, on that, or Papa Doc for you old school movie people out there. But they had him on the show, and Dakorien Moore, I believe, was on the show as well, or Ryan Clark was talking to him somewhere. I don't know, but I noticed that's not happening with any of Oregon's other players. So this hype train is just continuing to chug along, and I've contributed to it. I think I've tried to not necessarily ram it through. I don't know train terminology as well as I was really hoping I would. But like when there's a sign that comes down that says the train has to stop, or there's a fence or something, I'm not saying the train should just run through it. I've been trying to kind of like, all right, just hit the brakes only a little bit though, because this guy has got all the potential in the world. Has not had any sort of injury the way Jerion Dickey did, who's going into his third year and hasn't made an impact for the Ducks so far, who was also a 5-star wide receiver, not as highly regarded as Dakorien, but certainly a guy who was a big-time recruit, has not lived up to it because he hasn't really played. I don't suspect, barring an injury, Dakorien is going to have that sort of trajectory here. So, when you get at when everyone's getting asked about him and they're all saying, "Oh man, he's good, he's great," and then you got pieces getting ready, and then I'm talking about him all the time. I think it builds up an image of a guy in fans' heads that makes him probably the most exciting player to watch at the spring game on April 26th. We're getting there, not far away, but I don't know that there's another player in recent memory who is a true freshman. Maybe long-term, other guys have had the ability to showcase, like, over time, the first spring game, they don't do a ton, but then the second year, like, whoa, that guy's popping. I can't remember a guy who I've covered on this show, which has been, 3.5 years or so now, somewhere in that sort of range, that I can remember having this much excitement for a true freshman. So I'm here for it. On the one hand, I think he's in a great situation because there's so many veterans around him. He doesn't need to go out and produce like Jeremiah Smith did this past year, who had over 13 yards and I think like 14, 15 touchdowns or something like that. Oregon doesn't need him to do that, but if he is good enough to do that, then yeah, he'll probably get the chance to. So hopefully that is going to work out the way we're all kind of expecting and wanting to, because I think that pressure can certainly, guys can say they don't hear the noise. They hear the noise. Everybody does. Everybody can say, regardless of the sport, no, I tune that stuff at. You hear it at least a little. Maybe not as much as others, but at least a little bit. Dante Moore also said about Malik Benson that the Florida State wide receiver transfer, that he's a silent assassin, and talked about how he's a guy that, goes up and gets the ball. I just wondered when I heard that quote, what does that mean for Kyler Casper? Because Kyler Casper's going into his 4th year with the Ducks, and he's kind of supposed to be the jump ball guy, and he was going to have a role last year, but then he got hurt. Is Malik Benson someone they brought in because they don't feel like Kyler Casper is 100% off the injury or ever going to fully pop? I don't know. Just a thought that I had out there. And speaking of the spring game, we've got our celebrity coaches or honorary coaches, I think is what they refer to it as. You've got a former coach and a former player on each sideline. On one team, you're going to be coached by Rich Brooks and Bucky Irving. Rich Brooks has been on this program before. Awesome that he's going to get back there and do it again. That is the father of all Oregon football coaches, of course. He is the guy who brought Oregon to a level that it had not been to really ever. And then Bellotti elevated and Chip elevated and so on and so on. And speaking of Mike Bellotti, he's going to be on the other side, and Christian Gonzalez is going to be his honorary player coach there. So love those pairings. Stoked for the spring game. Submit any and all the questions that you got between now and then. I will get to every single position group, what to watch for, who's going to stand out, who to watch, freshmen, all that sort of stuff. So if you have any questions about that, by all means, let me know in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all that good jazz. More notes on spring football, because there are a lot of things that have kind of trickled out, and there's not a wealth of information. Eric Scopel the other day was on the show talking about how, the media don't get to watch as much as some other teams do, and that's just the way Oregon runs their show. I get it. Totally understand it. But when those little bits of information do get out or rumors do fly around, of course I discuss here on the show. It's spring football, one in particular that fires me up. First, though, this episode brought to you by TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com, only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees, TurboTax.com. All right, so I've got a splattering of spring notes that I've been compiling and tracking what news does come out of Eugene in the last couple weeks since spring practice has gotten underway. First of all, Taylor Lewan apparently likes Oregon's offensive line room. Guy was, I think, a former number 1 or top 5 pick in the NFL draft. I don't know exactly why he was there. I think it was part of a podcast endeavor or something. I don't know, but he tweeted out, and I just thought, oh, that's cool. That's cool. He was there, tweeted that he liked the energy and the group, and that they were having a good time, and that the passion was there, and all that sort of stuff. Doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. That's not the thing that fires me up. I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, I'm always fired up about the prospect of good offensive line play. Certainly, I expect Oregon's offensive line to be good this year. I think there will be an adjustment phase, but that's why their schedule is incredibly favorable, because they'll be able to, I think, navigate that to a 4-0 start. But the one that fires me up the most is Kenyon Sadiq, and it also makes me sad on the other side, but maybe not. You never know. So Kenyon Sadiq is reportedly up to 250 pounds. I think last year he got up to around 230, 235-ish, maybe 240. So he's up 10 to 15 pounds from a year ago. But according to Drew Merringer, the tight ends coach who was speaking the other day, said he still tops out at about 22.5 miles per hour. Speaking of weight additions, Tatum Tuiotti's reportedly added 10 pounds. I think he's going to try and fill that Jordan Burch role on the defensive line. I'll get to that in a moment. But Kenyon Sadiq is one of the most exciting players on this Oregon offense. No doubt about it. I think the interest and intrigue in Dakorien Moore is higher because he's an unknown. Kenyon Sadiq is still kind of an unknown. But I mean, in his freshman year, we saw very few glimpses of full potential Kenyon Sadiq. Sadiq unleashed, if you will. Then sophomore year, we saw more of it. Now, you are going to see what this offense looks like when Kenyon Sadiq is the number 1 tight end. And this guy is not like any tight end Oregon has ever had. They've had some darn good ones. Darn good ones. Ed Dickson, stud, long career in the NFL. Terrence Ferguson, really good. It's weird, honestly, that Terrence Ferguson's not in the tight end room. He's been there for so long. 3-year starter, 4-year player. Like, you talk about an Oregon guy through and through. 2 different coaching staffs, a couple different OCs, and T. Ferg was just there the entire time. So I think for Kenyon Sadiq, the opportunity is so great for him to, I'm never going to expect anybody to be like Brock Bowers. He is in that mold, though, where he's not just, PFF actually graded him higher than T. Ferg a year ago. No, I don't. He wasn't, playing as many snaps, so maybe you get more. You get beat on a few more individual matchups against guys, but from a blocking standpoint, more than capable. And if he's bulking up, then yeah, he's going to be able to move guys around. But he's so darn athletic, and the fact that you can hand the ball off to him on fly sweeps, get him involved in the screen game, yards after catch, throw down the field, can run the whole route tree. Like, he's just a really exciting and unique player. And so when I hear that, he keeps his speed while adding weight, yeah, he could be even better than Terrence Ferguson, who T-Ferg told me at Big Ten Media Days last year, yeah, Sadiq's going to be better than all of us. And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, I guess he could. I guess you could be the receiver that T-Ferg is with, more straight line speed, while also being the blocker that maybe an Ed Dickson was back in the day, who was just a big hulking tight end, but was also a really good pass catcher, of course. Like, I'm so excited to see what he brings to that position group. Now, the reason I say it makes me kind of sad is that if he has the year he's capable of, and that I want him to have for the sake of this Oregon offense, well, this might be his last year as a Duck. Might be 1 year as a starter, with his first 2 years having been a second or third or fourth tight end, and, playing sporadically. Of course, he had those 2 big plays in the Big Ten championship game for touchdown. Like, I just think about the hurdle all the time with that guy. Like, what other Oregon tight end could pull that off? T-Ferg I don't know if I ever remember seeing T-Ferg hurdle a guy like that. David Paulson wasn't doing that back in the day. Don't know that I ever remember Ed Dickson doing that. Great players, but this guy is very unique. So the reason that it, saddens me that he might only be here for 1 year also is a reason that I think about a thought I suggested on yesterday's show, which is going into 2026, there are going to be a lot of NFL caliber players who I think Oregon is going to throw the entire bag at, metaphorically speaking, with NIL to try to get him to come back. And this has been a great advantage for all of college football and for Oregon in particular this past season. You had guys like Teford come back, Jeff Bossa, Jabbar Muhammad came to Oregon from Washington instead of going to the NFL draft. He could have, but he came to Oregon. He was, of course, really good. Jordan Birch, another guy. You just keep going down the list. And I wonder if Sadiq will be more in the Terrence Ferguson realm where it's you can go to the NFL and they'll draft you, or you can come back, try to win a national championship, and be at the center of that and try to raise your draft stock at the same time. Maybe. It's just thought that I had. He could also play himself into the Derek Harmon, Josh Connerly predicament. Well, where I'm sure those guys loved Oregon. I know that Connerly did in particular being here for 3 years, but I think Derek Harmon really liked Oregon too. I'm sure they would have liked to come back at some level, but those guys are foregoing their final year of eligibility to go to the NFL draft because the draft stock is too high. Connerly is maybe going to be in the first round. Harmon's almost assuredly going to be in the first round. Hard to pass that up. So with Sadiq, though, at tight end, I think there's a higher chance than those guys he could return, but I think about him and whether he'd come back for his final season. Dylan Thieneman, the Purdue transfer at safety, Mateo Uiagalelei as well. He'd probably be the hardest of all of them to keep around because he plays such a premium position in the NFL. But I'm excited about Kenyon Sadiq. And, he's someone who I kind of know what to expect from an expectation standpoint and play style. I don't fully know what to expect from him as tight end one statistically. So definitely stoked about that. A couple other spring notes I wanted to weigh in on. Jahlil Florence reportedly is practicing with no restrictions. I believe Tosh Lupoy said that at a press conference, but that's a great sign. And I've been a huge Jahlil Florence fan since he committed to Oregon back in 2022. That was one of the early recruiting wins for Dan Lanning, was to get him over USC. And Josh Connerly was, of course, the big win of that 2022 recruiting class as well. That worked out pretty well. Florence, I think if he can get back to full health, great chance. I mean, a great chance to be one of Oregon's two starting outside corners. And that's not a lock because, as for my everydayers out there, you might have heard, or you might remember Scopel the other day mentioning Ife Obadegwu. He's heard the staff really likes Ife Obadegwu. I've heard the staff really likes Ife Obadegwu as well. And so I don't know that those two guys are lining up to be your starting corners. Doesn't mean they won't be key contributors in this year's secondary. And the secondary is one of the most interesting things to watch going into the spring game on April 26th because there are just so many different ways that it could play out. But I do think it's good news for Oregon, in particular that Florence is playing with no injury restrictions after what happened last year, because they don't have a ton of experience back there, and he at least has some. He played as a true freshman. He's one of the guys I bring up whenever someone asks, well, why doesn't Dan Lanning play true freshmen? They don't play, I don't know, I've seen him play every year Dan Lanning's been here. They haven't all been starters, but most, of course, are not. But Florence is someone who has actual experience, almost an entire season in 2023. He unfortunately got dinged up at the end, but he is, I think that's when he had a major injury and then there was surgery. He's been in and out. But again, practicing with no restrictions, great sign. He's one of the most experienced Oregon cornerbacks in that defensive backfield. The other most experienced guy, probably as pure corners, Theron Johnson, the transfer from Northwestern, be my guess. So I think those are a couple of guys to watch for starting outside corner positions. Wouldn't be shocked at all if one of them winds up getting one of those two starting spots on the outside. I think the nickel is pretty wide open. I think the other safety spot with Thieneman, who's definitely better as a free safety. I read something about that the other day, that Purdue played him too much, not on the back end. He should be a Verone McKinley type, John Boyette on the back end, just roaming free safety, let him be rangy, because that's what he does really, really well. He can do a lot of things well, but that's what he does best. So interested to see how all of that plays out, of course. But Jahlil Florence, Ife Obadegwu, keep an eye on those two guys at the cornerback position. Keep an eye on the transfer portal for Dana Altman's squad. So recently, further confirmation came down, not that I was surprised, that Oregon basketball is going to be very busy in the portal. I wanted to talk timeline for a moment, but the information I'm referring to is that Braden Burries, a 5-star combo guard, committed to Arizona. So Oregon was after him with a couple of other schools as well. I think Tennessee was in the fold there, and a couple of other high-profile schools. And Burries goes to Arizona. Certainly a guy that, based on his recruiting ranking, could be playing right away. Arizona, amazingly, even though they beat Oregon in the round of 32, losing several guys to the portal, college basketball is crazy. Like, college football undergoes huge roster overhauls nowadays every single year. By percentage, it pales in comparison to basketball. If you go down to the lower mid-major levels, over 50% of a team's roster is going to change almost every single season. That's just the way it is. Because if you have a bad year, then guys are going to go try to play elsewhere where they feel like they can win, and the coaching staff will want to reset. And then if you have a great year, you're going to capitalize on that to go to a bigger school. You know, in the conference where I do play-by-play, the Western Athletic Conference for Southern Utah, bunch of their guys from last year, they did not have a great year. They battled a bunch of injuries and whatnot. The roster going to be almost entirely different next year. They were towards the bottom of the conference. The team that won the regular season crown, Utah Valley, they have lost, I think, their entire starting 5 to the transfer portal. They were 1 game away from the NCAA tournament. Them's the breaks. That's how it goes nowadays. So anyway, bringing this back to the Ducks and Dana Altman. So Burries goes to Arizona. Oregon's brought in 2 guys via the portal. You have TK Simpkins, who came in from Elon. I talked about him earlier this week on the show. If you want to hear the segment on that, and you're listening on podcast, go check out the Locked On Ducks YouTube channel. I've got a segment up there about him. But that is a guy who I don't know if he's a starter or if he's a bench guy. I can see it going both ways. They've also brought in Devon Pryor from Texas, who's a small forward. So in theory, you could have your starting 5 set. Oh, wait, we're still waiting for Nate Biddle. So that's the biggest piece of news that makes Oregon essentially required to continue being active in the transfer portal when it comes to adding forwards. They need bigs either way. There is not currently a backup big on Oregon's roster. Now, there is a wing in there, Des Lindsey, who didn't play at all this past season, transferred in from the JUCO ranks. He's 6'6", really good athlete, solid shooter, but again, didn't play this past year. I don't know if that was an eligibility thing or if Dana Altman just didn't think he was ready. He's still, as far as I know, on the team, but how much are you going to expect from that guy? He's also not a big. So I'm really hoping and holding out that Nate Biddle is coming back to Oregon. If so, maybe your starting 5 is Simpkins and Pryor and KJ Evans, who announced he's back, and Jackson Shellstad, who's back, and Nate Biddle. Maybe that's where the starting 5 is, and you're trying to fill out your bench. I'd be surprised if that were the case. And I think this is going to be a continually evolving story for Oregon basketball in the coming weeks. This could stretch well into the summer. So, just a reminder, flashing back to last year, I don't expect that Oregon picks up a 2025 commit unless they literally do what they did last year with Jamari Phillips, who admittedly didn't have a big role on the team, but he was committed to Arizona. And then he flipped to Oregon last year, and that happened on June 8th. You can't think of basketball with the same timeline as football because they're, of course, not with regards to the calendar and recruiting and how all of that goes down. So Phillips flipped to Oregon on June 8th, and I expect him to have some sort of role. Maybe he's a starting 2 guard for the Ducks this year. I don't know. He and Simpkins, I think, are similar players. I think Phillips has more upside, but Simpkins has more experience. So maybe they battle it out, and we see what happens there at the 2-guard position. But I think that for Oregon, this is something that does have to happen. They have to add more portal players, or they will not have an NCAA tournament caliber roster, because how many guys are you realistically going to flip? Probably no more than 1. There are not as many options. There are not as many high-end players that Oregon would go after. There are not as many offers that go out. There isn't really anyone that Oregon has been closely tied to coming from the prep ranks. So even though they have an experienced team, and if you think a true freshman's talented enough to come in and start, like maybe they, we're looking at Braden Burries as a potential option to come in and start right away. Or maybe towards the end of the recruitment, they got the sense, yeah, he's going to go to Arizona, and that's why they went out and got Simpkins from Elon. Just a thought. But I think that for the Ducks, I'm still looking at minimum. Minimum, I would say 3 options that have to come in via the portal. That's like bare minimum. That's presuming that Phillips is able to take a big step forward, that maybe even Des Lindsey's able to contribute. I still think you need 3 guys out there. At least 2 of them have to be bigs. So last year, the transfers they added came in on the following dates. Brandon Angel came in on April 22nd. This show is airing April 11th. TJ Bamba came in on May 2nd. Supreme Cook came in on June 17th. Raheem Moss came in on April 29th. Those were the 5 transfers Oregon added last year. So timeline-wise, they're already ahead of where they were a season ago. And remember, I'd say of that bunch, Bamba was the most impactful. He scored the most points on the season last year. So I feel pretty solid in saying that. He started every game he played for the Ducks. That happened on May 2nd. Angel was a little bit earlier, April 22nd, but Supreme Cook had a non-zero, and frankly, Oregon's looking for a Supreme Cook. Energy, activity big, to come off the bench, just get in there, cause some havoc, maybe score some points, get some rebounds. Cook was not a premier shot blocker, but I think if you have, Biddle and Evans or one other big who can defend the rim a little bit, then, like Angel was a little skinny, so he got pushed around a touch, but I thought his shot blocking picked up a bit as the season went on. If you have guys like that, I think Dana Altman can mix and match just fine and still have plenty of defensive presence on the interior there. But I bring this up to point out that Oregon's already added guys who are going to contribute in some capacity. That's earlier than they did before. Now, maybe that's just random timing. Maybe that's just how it's all worked out. I think overall it's a good sign that they were already able to find those guys, and there weren't really any rumor. Like both of these kind of came out of left field a bit of like, oh, hey, Oregon's added a transfer. We knew where they were doing that, but we didn't know it was going to be these guys. There have been a couple names they've been tied to. Talked about Austin Rapp, the freshman of the year in the WCC down at Portland, or Paul Mbia, the Frenchman who would come in and be a freshman essentially, but plays professionally for a team that Tony Parker owns over there. He's from the Congo originally. There are names they've been tied to, but I think you're going to see as many as 5, at least 3 transfers come into the program. But I just don't want anyone to get antsy about, man, why aren't they adding anyone else? They need to find guys like the basketball timeline, very different. They found a double-digit point-a-game scorer early in May in the portal, and that kind of raised my excitement level about the team. So hopefully Dana Altman's got another trick up his sleeve. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a great weekend, a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, go Ducks.